In this video, we're gonna look at how to change percentages to fractions. So I've done the first video on how to change fractions to percentages. So if you've not had a chance to watch through that video, please be sure to go through it. I have left it in the description down below. So I'm going to start with some simple questions on division so that we see how good we are in terms of what we need, the information we need for this case. So if you're given a number like 2 divided by 10, 2 divided by 10 can be written as 2 over 10. Now, when you're dividing any number by the numbers that are powers of 10, that means they introduce a decimal to that number. Now, our numerator has only one digit, so that means that's the digit that will be in after the decimal. So I'll write that as 0.2. All right. So another way we can be able to change this fraction to a decimal is by doing the normal long division. So long division, we need this kind of a diagram. Now, which number goes in? So this is the numerator, and the numerator is the one that goes in. So you can always use the n in and the n in numerator to guide you. The numerator will always go in. So I'll write a 2 right there, and then of course the 10 will come out. So in this case, I'm considering the 10 times table. So I want to see how many times 10 goes into 2. Now, if you know the 10 times table, let me just write it right here. 10 times 1 will give you 10. 10 times 2 will give you 20. So even before proceeding, you'll notice that there's no number that is less than 2 in the 10 times table. So I'm gonna put a 0. So 10 times 0 will give me a 0 which is less than 2. So I'll introduce a decimal place here. The decimal place does the magic of allowing us to add a 0 to this number. All right, so here we have a 20. So now we can go back to the 10 times table and figure out 10 times what gives us 20. We have it already here. 10 times 2 gives us 20. So I'm gonna write a 2 at the top. So 2 times 10 gives me 20. I'll put it down here and then subtract. So 0 take away 0, no remainder. 2 take away 2 is no remainder. So that is another way we can be able to calculate the fraction to a decimal. All right, so another example is 3 divided by 100. So what if we add one more 0 to the 10? Yeah, so this is 3 over 100. And now, remember, we have said these zeros give us the number of decimal places. So if I write 0 point, I need 2 numbers after this decimal place. At the top, we have only one number, so we'll use 0 to take the other place, okay? So 0.03, and that is our decimal number. Now, another way we can be able to do this, just like we have done the first one, the long division, we can still do it for this example. So I'll write my division sign right there. Now, I have just said this is the numerator, and the numerator will always go inside. So if I know the numerator is 3, then the number that is the denominator will go outside. So here I'm considering the 100 times table. So I ask myself, 100 times what gives me 3? Now, if you know the 100 times table, it's 100 times 1, which is 100. 100 times 2, which gives you 200. So in this case, there's no number that is less than 3 in the 100 times table. So I do what I did in the first example. I take a 0 at the top and put a point. This point allows me to add zeros, okay? So I'll add a first 0. Now, then I ask myself again, 100 goes into 30 how many times? Is there any number less than 30 in the 100 times table? No. So it goes 0 times. Now remember, 100 times 0 is 0. So I'll just put a 0 right there. And then I will do something like subtracting. So this is 0 at 3. Now the decimal place allows me to add a 0 at every point. So let me just use a different color right there. So it allowed me to add a 0 when I had this at the first time, and then it allows me to add another 0 at this step. Yeah, so now I go back to the 100 times table. So I continue. 100 times what number gives me? Any number close to 300. There. So I'll put a 0 right there. So 3, not a 0, wow, a 3 right there. So 100 times 3 gives me 300. So I'm gonna write 300 right there, and then when I subtract, no remainder, no remainder, no remainder. All right, so that is the same way that you can, another way you can be able to find this fraction to a decimal. All right, so with that in mind, then I think we can now be able to comfortably start how to change percentages then to fractions. The first example that I'm gonna use is 20%. How will I change 20% to a fraction? So 20% means 20 per 100. Yeah, so we always know the total percentage is 100. So if you say 20%, it means 20 per 100. Now, one of the ways we can be able to, of course, express this is to ensure that we leave our fraction in the simplest form possible. Yeah, so that means this is a fraction, but it's not the simplest. Okay, so when you look at a 0 on top and a 0 below, you can always think about cancelling the zeros. So 1 0 will cancel 1 0 at the bottom. So 1 0 cancels 1 0 at a time. So if we have 2 0 at the top, they'll cancel 2 zeros. But in this case, we have 1 0, so it cancels only 1 0. So what we'll have remaining right there is a 2 over 10. And then you ask yourself once again, these 2 and 10, do they have a common factor? One thing that is common with them is that they are even numbers. And for even numbers, they have a common factor, which is 2. Very well. Yeah, so 2 can divide 2 how many times? Once. It can divide 10 how many times? 5 times. So our answer will be 1 over 5. So 20% as a fraction is 1 over 5. Let's look at another example, 25%. So if we have 25%, we'll start by writing it as a fraction, 25 per 100. So that's what 25% means. And then look for numbers that can simplify this question. So of course, if you really want to look at it in a different way, I might express 25 in terms of a multiple of its factors, okay? A product of its factors. So two factors that multiply 25 multiply each other to get 25 is 5 times 5. Yeah, so 5 times 5 is 25. And then I do the same for the denominator. Now I want you to keep in mind that in the divisibility test, when we have a number that ends with a 5 or a 0, it means that that number is divisible by 5. So that's why I am finding these numbers as factors, multiples, a product of its factors. And in this case, I'm going to start with a 5 and then multiplied by what gives you 100. 5 times 20. Very well. Okay, so in the next step, I will cancel out these numbers. All right, so let's see. If 5 appears at the top and at the bottom, we can cancel it out. It's like it divides each other. And then the next step is to rewrite what we are remaining with. So in this case, we are remaining with 5 over 20. Now check between 5 and 20. Check for a common factor. So we have said any number that ends with either a 5 or a 0, it means that number is divisible by 5. So by 5, 1, by 5, 4. Very well. So our answer then as a fraction will be a quarter. 25% expressed as a fraction is a quarter. All right, so let's look at another example. This is the third example. If we had 44%, I want you to pause this video and then try solving this, and then come back and check out whether you have done the very same steps that I'm using. So I'm gonna take this 44 and divide it by 100. Remember, 44% means 44 per 100. And then I ask myself, what is a common factor between 44 and 100? Now these are even numbers, that means 2 is a common factor. So I'm going to divide by 2. So 44 divided by 2 is 22. 44, no. 2 divides 44 how many times? 22 times. 2 divides 100 how many times? 50 times. All right. Is there any other number that we can simplify further? Yes, these are still even numbers, so we can still divide them by 2. 2 divides 22 how many times? 11 times. 2 divides 50 how many times? 25 times. So when you look at this fraction, is there a common factor between the numerator and the denominator? At this point, there's no common factor, so that means our answer can be left as 11 over 25. All right, so on to our last example. This is 8%. How will we change 8% to a fraction? So 8 over 100. 8%, 8 per 100. And then the next question is, are there common factors? So these two are even numbers, so obviously 2 is a factor. So 2 divides 8 how many times? 4. It divides 100 how many times? 50 times. All right, so I go ahead and ask myself once again, is there a common factor between 4 and 50? They are even numbers, so that means 2 is still a common factor. So 2 divides 4 how many times? 2. It divides 50 how many times? 25 times. All right. Any other factor that is common to these two? This is an even and an odd number, and so far they do not have any common factor, so that leaves 2 over 25 as our final fraction. All right. So I hope you enjoyed this video.